Even the strongest hearts can falter when no one is watching. Claire Bennett, a determined assistant in the high-stakes world of Chicago finance, has spent years carrying burdens she never chose, masking exhaustion behind a mask of competence. She dreams of being seen, yet the city moves too fast for anyone to notice. Then there's James Whitmore, a self-made billionaire, untouchable in every boardroom, precise in every decision, a man whose present silences a room before he speaks. To the world, he is perfect. To Claire, he is mesmerizing, yet distant, a puzzle she cannot solve. One late night, exhaustion catches Claire off guard. A simple act of care from James, a whisper, a hand steadying her, shifts the balance. What begins as professional respect turns into unspoken tension, rumors and whispers. A single photograph, misinterpreted intentions, and months of silence threaten to unravel everything. Can trust survive when pride, misunderstanding, and ambition collide? Will Claire and James find a way to bridge the chasm between fear and connection? Join us on this emotional journey through ambition, vulnerability, and unexpected love. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to start the story of Close Your Eyes. The billionaire CEO tells his assistant, then shocks her. Even the strongest shoulders can grow tired when no one else sees the weight they carry. Claire Bennett had learned that truth a long time ago, though she rarely admitted it, even to herself. At 35, she had become the kind of woman who moved through each day with quiet discipline. Her alarm rang before dawn, its chime pulling her from shallow sleep in her one-bedroom apartment on the north side of Chicago. She rose quickly, as if lying still a moment longer would invite weakness. The hardwood floor was cold under her bare feet, a reminder that comfort was a luxury she had not allowed herself in years. She dressed in pressed slacks and a plain blouse, clothing that signaled competence rather than flair. Makeup was applied with precision concealer dabbed beneath tired eyes, a sweep of mascara, a neutral shade on her lips. By the time she locked her door and stepped into the gray morning, she wore the armor she needed for the world, neat, steady, untouchable. The train ride downtown was part of her ritual. She carried a notebook, its pages filled with lists of tasks, reminders, names, and times. While others scrolled on their phones, she reviewed schedules, memorized meeting details, and drafted emails in her head. A paper cup of cheap coffee steamed in her hand, bitter but strong enough to keep her focus sharp. By the time she stepped out at the station near the towering glass headquarters of Whitmore Investments, she was already in motion, her stride brisk, her shoulders squared. She had been James Whitmore's assistant for 3 years now. To many, that title sounded small. To Claire, it was survival. It meant she had climbed from a childhood of unpaid bills and long winters in Pennsylvania to the top floor of one of Chicago's most powerful firms. But survival came at a cost. Her desk sat just outside James's office, a constant stream of emails, phone calls, and requests flowing toward her from every direction. The day began with rescheduling a meeting for the European division, then confirming flights for an investor from New York, then tracking down a missing report that had to be on James's desk within the hour. Claire handled each task with precision, her fingers flying over the keyboard, her voice calm no matter the urgency. She remembered birthdays, dietary restrictions, preferred seating in conference rooms. Details that others forgot were the details she built her reputation on. And yet, with each passing day, the weight of perfection pressed heavier against her chest. By mid-morning, her stomach often knotted from too much caffeine and too little food. By early afternoon, her shoulders ached from hunching over spreadsheets. Her temples throbbed from the glow of screens. But she never let it show. When colleagues paused at her desk, she straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and spoke with clipped confidence. Inside, her body begged for rest. Claire had learned long ago that fatigue was dangerous. It opened cracks. It made people ask questions she had no desire to answer. So, she ignored the tremor in her hands when she carried stacks of files. She silenced the whisper in her mind that urged her to breathe, to pause, to care for herself. Strength had become both shield and prison. She told herself it was the only way. After all, her father's sudden death when she was 12 had left her mother drowning in the double shifts at the diner. Claire had carried grocery bags, filled out forms, and counted change at the kitchen table. Weakness had never been an option then, and it was not an option now. Still, there were moments when she wondered how long a body could push without breaking. The office stretched into evening, the city beyond the windows glowing gold, then fading to steel gray. One by one, colleagues slipped out with casual goodbyes, their laughter echoing faintly down the hallway. Claire stayed, her eyes fixed on the calendar for tomorrow, her pen scratching notes for James's morning briefing. Her chest felt tight, as though an invisible hand pressed against her ribs. She rolled her shoulders, willed herself to finish one more task. Just one more. Always one more. The clock ticked past 9. Her coffee had long gone cold. She swallowed against the dryness in her throat, blinking to keep the blur from her vision. Pride whispered that leaving early would look like failure. Pride reminded her that someone else could take her place if she slipped. So, she worked on, clinging to discipline as if it were oxygen. When she finally leaned back, exhaustion dragged at her bones. For a heartbeat, she allowed her gaze to drift toward the city outside. Chicago pulsed with light, cars threading their way through the streets, windows glittering in countless towers. It was beautiful, yet indifferent. The city did not care if she stood strong or if she crumbled. Claire pressed her palms flat against the desk, steadying herself. She thought of her mother back in Pennsylvania, still proud of her daughter working for a billionaire CEO. That pride was another weight she carried, heavier than the files stacked around her. She whispered to herself so softly that no one could hear that mistakes were not allowed. Not even a skipped breath, not even a moment of weakness. Her heart beat harder, faster, as if testing the truth of those words. And in that quiet office, surrounded by glass walls and silent screens, Claire felt the pressure building. She could not name it, but it was there, a storm pressing at the edges of her carefully controlled world. Outside, the lights of Chicago shimmered, restless and alive, as though warning her that change was coming. Strength is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a debt collected from childhood. For Claire Bennett, that debt began in a small town in Pennsylvania, where winters were long and summers heavy with humidity. The streets were narrow, lined with modest houses whose paint peeled under the weight of too many seasons. Hers was one of them, a 2-bedroom home that always felt too small for the worries it carried. Her father's sudden death left a silence that never really lifted. Claire was only 12. She remembered the funeral, the scent of damp earth, and the way her mother's shoulders sagged as if the weight of the world had been placed on her back all at once. From that day forward, Claire understood that childhood was over. Her mother took on 2 jobs, waitressing at the diner during the day and cleaning offices at night. The house was often quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. Claire learned to do laundry, to cook simple meals, to manage the endless small tasks that once seemed invisible when her father was alive. By 13, she had found a part-time job bagging groceries at the corner store. She counted each dollar carefully, smoothing the crumpled bills before handing them to her mother. At night, when her mother returned home with aching feet, Claire laid out the stack of envelopes on the kitchen table: gas, electric, mortgage, and tried to calculate which bill could wait another week. Her friends were out at football games or sleepovers, but Claire was learning interest rates and due dates, her pencil tapping against the paper in concentration. The winters were the hardest. She remembered the way the cold seeped through thin walls, the rattle of the furnace struggling to keep up. Some nights she studied by the dim glow of a lamp, wrapped in 2 sweaters, her breath misting in the air. She told herself the discomfort was fuel, that it would push her out of the small town and into a life where heat came with the turn of a dial and bills were not constant threats. High school was a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and scholarship applications. Claire filled out forms late at night, searching for words that would convince strangers she was worthy of a chance. She polished essays until her fingers ached, describing dreams she was almost afraid to claim. When the acceptance letter finally came, she held it close, her heart racing. A scholarship meant escape. It meant she would not be trapped in the same cycle her mother had endured. But escape was not easy. At the university, Claire carried the same habits she had learned at home. She worked nights at a library circulation desk, weekends waiting tables. She learned to survive on little sleep, rushing from class to shifts, from shifts to study groups. Other students laughed easily in the cafeteria, talked about road trips and concerts. Claire kept her head down, calculating each expense, each hour of her time. She became skilled at hiding exhaustion. A splash of cold water in the bathroom between lectures. A bright smile when customers grew impatient at the diner. A polite nod when classmates invited her out. Though she almost always said no. It was not that she did not long for ease. Deep down, she craved the freedom of simply belonging, of laughing without counting the cost. But she feared that any crack in her armor would confirm what she most dreaded, that she did not belong, that she was fragile, that she was one step away from failure. So, she built routines like walls. Each morning, she rose before dawn, reviewed her goals, and pressed forward. Each night, she collapsed onto thin dorm bedding with a sense of grim victory. She had survived another day. By the time she graduated, degree in hand, Claire had perfected the art of appearing unshakable. She was proud of that mask. It had carried her through years that could have broken her, but it also left her wary. Vulnerability, in her mind, was not just risky, it was dangerous. It was an invitation for others to dismiss her, to pity her, or to take away the fragile ground she had fought for. She carried that belief into adulthood. Now, in the skyscrapers of Chicago, the lessons of Pennsylvania still echoed. When colleagues laughed lightly about weekend getaways, she remembered nights she had counted coins at the kitchen table. When someone complained about deadlines, she thought of her mother limping home after a double shift. Claire did not complain. She endured. Endurance had become her identity. It was both her strength and her burden. She knew that people admired her efficiency, her composure, the way she kept things running smoothly for James Whitmore. What they did not know, what she would never allow them to see, was the cost. The tension in her chest that rarely lifted, the way her jaw ached from clenching against words she never spoke. One evening, sitting alone on the train back to her apartment, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. For a moment, she saw not the polished assistant, but the girl from Pennsylvania. The teenager bent over bills, whispering to herself that she would never let anyone see her break. That vow still lived in her bones. It was both armor and chain. As the train clattered through the tunnels, lights flickering past, Claire touched her notebook of tasks, holding it like a lifeline. She whispered a truth that only she could hear. Weakness was not an option. Not now. Not ever. Her reflection stared back, silent but unyielding, a reminder that the journey she had begun in Pennsylvania was not yet finished. There were people who entered a room, and silence followed them as if it were a habit. James Whitmore was one of them. At 44, he carried the kind of presence that made whispers stop mid-sentence and heads tilt slightly in recognition. Born in a small Kansas town, James had grown up on a farm where work began before sunrise and ended only when the sun dipped below the horizon. His hands bore faint calluses from chores done long before most boys thought of responsibility. That early life had instilled in him a quiet persistence, a discipline that would later shape him into a self-made billionaire. His reputation preceded him wherever he went. Media headlines praised his investment acumen, his strategic brilliance, his uncanny ability to predict market shifts. Within Whitmore Investments, he was meticulous, exacting, and unyielding. Meetings with him were exercises in precision. Each sentence, each gesture, each glance was measured, controlled. Employees quickly learned that James noticed everything and rarely overlooked anything. From Claire's perspective, he was formidable. She had spent years observing him from just outside his office door, studying the rhythm of his day, the subtle shifts in tone when he addressed a board of directors, the way he navigated crises without losing composure. There was a magnetic pull, a combination of awe and intimidation. She admired his intellect, his decisiveness, yet she maintained a careful distance, aware of the invisible barrier he seemed to erect around himself. James was not without scars, though beneath the polished veneer lay old wounds. As a young man, he had been underestimated by those who valued lineage over merit. Board members had once dismissed his proposals with a polite smirk, and social elites had regarded him with condescension for his rural roots. Those early experiences left him cautious, shaping his demeanor into one of guarded confidence, one that few ever breached. In the conference room, Claire often watched as James entered. Conversation would halt, laptops would close slightly, and a stillness would settle over the space, dense and quiet. He did not need to speak to command attention. The room acknowledged him automatically. She noticed the subtle ways people adjusted chairs, pulled closer to their tables, hands folded, eyes alert but respectful. Today was no different. The meeting began with a flurry of data points and financial projections. But when James arrived, the room fell into a rhythm dictated not by words, but by the weight of his presence. Claire felt it as a physical thing, a gravity that seemed to settle into her chest, urging her posture straight, her hands still. She admired him, yet she was keenly aware of the invisible line she must not cross. She observed the faint traces of wear behind his eyes. The shadows that told of long nights poured into work, decisions made that carried consequences beyond what most could imagine. It humanized him in her mind just enough to remind her that beneath the untouchable exterior, he was still very much a man. Yet the vulnerability was hidden beneath layers of control, rarely revealed and even more rarely shared. As James addressed the board, the power in his voice silenced any dissent before it could form. A single glance from him redirected focus, corrected a course without raising an eyebrow. Claire had never seen such authority so effortlessly exercised. She could feel the room bending to his will, and she understood that for all her own strength, she was witnessing a mastery that was almost impossible to comprehend. It was during a tense discussion about a potential acquisition that Claire first saw cracks in his armor, or, rather, a hint that the armor was not impenetrable. A junior analyst questioned a forecast, nervously fidgeting with her pen. The room tensed, expecting the usual reprimand. Instead, James's gaze softened briefly, just enough that Claire noticed a flicker of patience, almost empathy. It was fleeting, and the meeting resumed its rigorous pace, but the moment lingered in her mind. Even as he projected perfection, she sensed the old wounds still shaped his decisions. The memory of being underestimated, of being dismissed because of where he came from, hovered beneath the surface. Claire realized that every precision, every measured move, was also a defense. It was a fortress built from years of proving himself, from fighting for recognition that was never freely given. She marveled at the paradox: someone so commanding, so untouchable, could also carry the weight of the past so silently. It reminded her painfully of her own journey of carrying burdens quietly, of hiding fatigue and fear. For a moment, she saw them not as separate beings in different worlds, but as two people bound by the relentless demands of ambition and the lessons learned in youth. The meeting ended with Claire delivering her part flawlessly, and James's brief nod of approval passed almost unnoticed by others. Yet she felt it keenly. It was recognition that mattered, small but profound, like a quiet affirmation in a life defined by relentless expectation. As she left the conference room, she glanced back at him. James's expression was unreadable, yet she thought she saw a shadow of weariness there, a hint that even the untouchable could falter. The image lingered in her mind, seeding a thought she had never dared voice. Perhaps no one was truly untouchable. Perhaps even the strongest had moments of vulnerability, carefully concealed from the world. Claire walked down the long hallway, her heels echoing softly against polished marble, and she wondered how long it would take for the first cracks to show, for the impervious facade to reveal what lay beneath. She could not yet know, but the thought pressed gently at the edges of her consciousness. The untouchable CEO, imposing and perfect, might one day reveal the human being beneath, and perhaps she would witness it. The lights of Chicago glimmered through the windows, indifferent yet constant, and in that moment, Claire felt the stirrings of a new awareness the world's most untouchable man was not as invincible as he appeared. Exhaustion did not ask for permission. It arrived quietly, insidiously, in the moments when pride refused to yield. Claire Bennett had spent hours staring at spreadsheets that blurred into incoherent lines, her fingers numb from typing, her temples pounding. The office lights glowed cold above her, the hum of air conditioning and the occasional elevator chime forming a monotonous symphony that only accentuated her fatigue. She reached for another file, her hands shaking slightly, breath catching in a sudden constriction. Every muscle tensed as she tried to push forward, to finish one more task, to prove that she could endure, that she could be invincible. But tonight, her body refused to comply. Her knees buckled subtly before she could stabilize herself. The world tilted, just for a fraction of a second, enough for panic to rise unbidden. She caught the edge of her desk instinctively, her heart hammering, breath shallow and quick. Then a hand was there, firm and steady, anchoring her. Claire blinked, disoriented, and found herself looking into the sharp, controlled eyes of James Whitmore. He had been gone hours ago. No one could have predicted his presence in the late office. Yet here he stood, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, a hint of fatigue in his posture that made him almost human in a way she had rarely seen. "Close your eyes," he said, low and calm, the words carrying a certainty that brooked no argument. Her first instinct was to protest, to assert that she was fine, that she did not need assistance, that any admission of weakness was unacceptable. Pride and habit warred within her. Yet the strength in his gaze held her, anchored her, as if the motion of the world had slowed around them. Claire obeyed, trembling, guided gently to the small leather couch near the office wall. The sensation was strange, safe, yet exposing, every heartbeat an unspoken confession of vulnerability. Shame flared, a hot sting beneath her ribs. In that moment, she felt the weight she had carried for years, the endless hours, the self-imposed discipline, the constant suppression of fatigue and doubt pressing against her chest. Yet it was tempered by something she had long forgotten: relief, a fleeting permission to let go. Her mind raced. She felt gratitude tangled with discomfort. She had not expected kindness. She had not expected the human side of a man she had admired, feared, and respected in equal measure. The juxtaposition of power and tenderness unsettled her, made her pulse quicken, made her cheeks warm. Still, the words repeated in her mind, "Close your eyes," a simple command, yet it carried with it the weight of trust, trust she had never given, not lightly, not easily, and though she felt an instinct to pull back, to reclaim control, a small part of her wanted to surrender, to let someone else bear the burden for just a moment. James remained near, steady, a silent sentinel. He did not rush, did not speak further, did not demand acknowledgement. His presence was enough. He anchored her with a hand at her elbow, not forceful, but firm, a line drawn between chaos and calm. Claire closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to breathe. 1, 2, 3 slow breaths, each exhale a small liberation. She felt the tremor in her hands, the tension in her shoulders, the dizzying pull of exhaustion, and let it wash over her without resistance. Inside, a dialogue played shame against relief, pride against acknowledgement, fear against desire. She reminded herself that weakness was dangerous, yet she could not deny the strange comfort in this brief pause. Her mind wandered back to earlier nights, to the lonely apartment, the cold train rides, the small victories that never felt enough. She realized that the very discipline that had carried her through hardship had also trapped her, creating walls that kept help and warmth at bay. And yet, here it was, offered without expectation. The brief stillness stretched, allowing a rare clarity, Claire felt the fragility that she had long hidden from herself. She recognized it without judgment, noting its presence, its necessity, its truth. Vulnerability was not failure. It was a signal, a bridge, a whisper that she did not have to endure alone. When she finally opened her eyes, James was still watching. Calm, unwavering, the moment was not monumental in action, but in significance. It was the first crack in the armor she had carried for decades, the first acknowledgement that she could permit herself a measure of weakness. Even in his presence, her breath came steady now, though her pulse still drummed a rapid rhythm in her ears. Shame lingered, yes, but alongside it came something almost forbidden, a small, growing gratitude, the kind that warmed from deep within and threatened the rigid structures of her pride. Claire made a silent vow, one that she did not speak aloud. This vulnerability would not repeat without her consent. She would guard her boundaries, yet she would not deny herself moments of trust or care. The office lights reflected softly off the glass, and the city of Chicago sprawled endlessly beyond the windows. Below, headlights moved like scattered fireflies along the streets. Above, the night seemed vast and patient, watching silently as she navigated the first tremor in her walls. That tremor, slight but undeniable, hinted at change. A door had been opened, and while she would not rush to pass through it, she could not ignore the narrow crack along her pride. Somewhere deep within, Claire felt the beginnings of a realization. Strength could coexist with vulnerability. That admission, fragile as it was, would shape the choices to come. And as the night pressed on, the subtle fracture in her carefully constructed armor whispered possibilities, soft but persistent, like the first echo of a distant storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Sometimes care arrived silently, a bottle of water placed within reach, a coat draped gently over her shoulders, small acts that carried weight beyond measure. Claire Bennett noticed these details immediately. Each morning, she found a neatly labeled water bottle on her desk, a sticky note reminding her to eat. She would glance around the office, seeing nothing unusual, yet she knew. James Whitmore had left them, quietly, efficiently, deliberately. Her chest warmed briefly, a small flicker of gratitude, yet pride flared just as quickly. She could not allow herself to lean on anyone. She had built her career, her reputation, on self-reliance. Accepting kindness felt like admitting weakness, and weakness had no place in her world. The office corridors stretched long and empty after hours. She walked briskly, heels clicking against the polished marble, carrying stacks of reports to the boardroom. The elevator was cramped, fluorescent lights flickering slightly overhead. When James entered alongside her, the space felt charged. Their hands brushed as she handed over a folder. The contact was brief, fleeting, yet it resonated in a way neither acknowledged. Claire forced herself to maintain distance, to accelerate her pace, to prove she did not need help. She organized meetings, drafted emails, tracked deadlines with meticulous precision. Every keystroke, every gesture, was a silent assertion. I am enough, I am capable, I do not require intervention. James noticed, of course. He always did. Yet he did not interfere overtly. His smiles were rare, small, almost imperceptible. A lift of an eyebrow, a brief nod, a subtle shift in posture, moments that spoke volumes in their quietness. They communicated without words, a delicate negotiation of presence and respect, authority and intimacy. Claire felt her heart respond to these silent cues. A quickened pulse when he lingered near her desk, a catch of breath when he passed a note reminding her to rest, and yet, her rational mind built walls faster than her emotions could break them down. She reminded herself of her autonomy, her need to remain unassailable, her refusal to be seen as dependent. The tension between them grew in these small gestures. A paper left, corrected with his signature, a brief glance during a meeting, the soft rustle of papers as they both reached for the same file. Claire's awareness of him expanded with each subtle act, awareness tinged with both longing and resistance. She moved through the office like a coiled spring, aware of every shadow, every reflection, every faint echo of his presence. Even when seated at her desk, typing furiously, she felt it, the gentle insistence of his attention, the way it hovered near her without encroaching. She could sense his care, but she refused to let it dictate her actions. Some afternoons, she would glance up from her screen to find him watching, not critically, not with expectation, but with that quiet vigilance that had always unnerved her, and she would look away quickly, fingers resuming their frantic pace across the keyboard. Pride demanded she remain unbroken, yet the flutter in her chest betrayed her carefully maintained composure. During brief moments of solitude, Claire thought of the contrast between her internal reactions and the exterior she maintained. She noted the quickening of her pulse, the flush of warmth in her cheeks, and reminded herself that vulnerability must never be visible. Every smile from him, every note of concern, became a challenge she had to counteract internally. The city beyond the office windows shifted with the seasons. Leaves in Chicago's streets fell in clusters of gold and brown, swept along by brisk autumn winds. Each gust reminded Claire that change was constant, inevitable, unstoppable. She felt it creeping closer, not just in the environment, but in the quiet tension that threaded through their interactions. James's care was persistent, yet restrained. He never overstepped. He never verbalized the concern that hovered behind his gestures. His intent was clear to those who knew how to observe, but opaque to everyone else. Claire was acutely aware, but she could not allow herself to acknowledge the full extent. Doing so would crack the armor she had spent years reinforcing. One evening, as the office emptied and fluorescent lights flickered, she carried a heavy folder down the hall. James followed silently. Their hands brushed again, just barely, a whisper of touch that sent a tremor through her awareness. She straightened instantly, avoiding eye contact, forcing her pace to quicken. The folder thudded against her side with every step, a metronome marking both her determination and her restraint. Her mind wrestled with the contradictions, the warmth his gestures stirred, the clarity of her pride, the fear of dependence, the curiosity about what might lie beneath his composed exterior. The push and pull left her breathless, even as her outward movements remained controlled, efficient, precise. A subtle shift in his expression caught her attention, a nearly imperceptible smile, a brief flash of amusement at something in the report she carried. Her heart betrayed her, fluttering despite herself. She clenched the folder tighter, reminding herself of boundaries, of autonomy, of the walls she had built over years of careful discipline. And yet, those walls had tiny fissures now. The touch of his hand, the quiet attentiveness, the soft smiles, the unspoken concern, they had begun to leave marks, traces of vulnerability Claire could not fully suppress. She felt the tension coiling between them, a silent force pressing against the barriers of her carefully constructed self. Outside, the leaves continued to fall, carpeting the streets in gold. Each one seemed to signal that the winds of change were not far behind, hinting at storms yet to come. Claire sensed it in her own chest, a stirring, subtle, inevitable. The balance she had maintained between pride and yearning, independence and acknowledgement, was shifting, imperceptibly at first, yet undeniably. She breathed deeply, steadying herself, returning focus to the tasks before her. Still, the faint hum of anticipation lingered, threaded through every interaction, every glance, every gesture. And as she walked through the dim office halls, the fallen leaves visible beyond the windows, she could not ignore it. A new current had entered her life, quiet but persistent, and it demanded attention, reflection, and an inevitable confrontation with the walls she had built. Jealousy rarely shouted, it whispered, then spread like smoke. The first whisper began with Olivia Grant. At 38, polished and ambitious, she was the kind of woman who never raised her voice but always made herself heard. As director of public relations, she was fluent in the language of implication. Once, she and James had worked closely, late nights filled with strategy and laughter that hinted at more. Nothing official had ever come of it, Yet Olivia had carried the memory like an unfinished sentence. So, when she noticed James's eyes linger too long on his assistant, when she saw Claire Bennett walking beside him in the hall, pride straightened and exhaustion shadowed. Something hardened within her. She did not confront directly. Instead, she let her observations slip into conversations the way perfume lingers in a room, subtle, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Of course she has his schedule memorized, Olivia murmured one afternoon, her smile sweet, her tone casual. She seems to know more than she should. The words carried, traveling from cubicle to cubicle, floor to floor. Soon the whispers had shape. The CEO notices her. The assistant is closer than an assistant should be. Claire felt the shift before she heard the words. The glances changed. Colleagues paused a fraction too long when she entered a room. Conversation slowed, then resumed after she passed. The silence was heavy, knowing, suggestive. She told herself to ignore it, to keep her chin lifted and her steps steady. But late in the afternoon, while pouring coffee in the break room, she caught a fragment. Two assistants leaned close, laughter muffled behind manicured hands. Must be nice, having the boss so invested, one whispered. Claire's hand tightened on the coffee pot, heat rushing up her neck. She wanted to turn, to confront, to demand they say it louder. Instead, she poured her coffee in silence, her shoulders rigid, her jaw clenched. She walked away without spilling a drop, though her insides churned with shame. James, for his part, remained outwardly unaffected. His meetings continued with the same rigor, his tone the same measured authority. He neither addressed the whispers nor acknowledged them. To Claire, his composure felt like indifference. To others, it seemed confirmation. Silence, after all, often sounded like consent. The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Claire noticed the change in how people looked at her. What had once been respect tinged with curiosity was now suspicion cloaked in politeness. Every nod seemed weighted, every smile edged with judgment. Her work became her refuge. She doubled her pace, arriving earlier, staying later, filling her calendar with tasks that left little room for thought. Each email sent, each report delivered, was a stone added to the wall she built against the whispers. She would prove, through sheer output, that she belonged, that she was not favored for reasons other than her skill, but the effort cost her. Nights grew longer, sleep shorter. The exhaustion she had glimpsed weeks earlier now pressed against her ribs like an iron band. She remembered the couch in James's office, the quiet command to close her eyes, the strange relief she had felt, and she buried the memory, fearing that if she dwelled on it, the whispers would take on a truth they did not deserve. Then came the email. It arrived in her inbox late one night, long after most of the office had gone home. The subject line was blank, the sender anonymous. The words inside were few, but sharp as a blade. Unusual favoritism has consequences. Watch how much protection you think you have. Claire stared at the screen, her hands cold, her stomach twisting. She read it once, twice, 3 times, as though repetition might soften its edge. It did not. She closed the laptop sharply, the sound echoing in the empty office. For a moment, she sat frozen, her breath shallow, her mind a storm of fear and fury. She wanted to forward it to HR, to march into James's office, to demand justice. Yet pride restrained her. To acknowledge the message was to give it power. To show fear was to let them win. So she buried it, just as she buried her exhaustion, her doubts, her longing. She told herself she could withstand even this. She told herself that storms passed, that smoke cleared. But her reflection in the dark window betrayed her eyes shadowed, lips pressed thin, posture taut with a strain she could no longer fully disguise. Outside, clouds gathered above the city, heavy and low, their darkness mirrored in the glass tower of Whitmore Investments. The storm of rumor had not yet broken, but Claire could feel it building, dense and suffocating, pressing closer with each passing day. The whispers had become a chorus, the smoke a haze. And as she walked down the long hallway, her heels striking the marble in measured beats, she realized the air itself had changed. Trust was thinning, safety was fragile, and somewhere above her, beyond the high glass walls, the sky was preparing to open. Scandal did not need the truth. It only needed a photograph, a bold headline, and the kind of silence that kills. The image appeared first on a finance blog, grainy, taken from the street below. It showed James Whitmore steadying Claire Bennett as she stumbled outside Whitmore Tower, his hand on her elbow, her face tilted toward him. From the right angle, it looked like intimacy. From the wrong audience, it looked like proof. By noon, the headline had spread across news outlets and social media. Billionaire CEO caught an affair with his assistant. Claire read it on her phone while waiting for the subway, her breath catching as the words blurred. Strangers now dissected her face, her career, her presence beside James. Some mocked, some pitied, many condemned. Her stomach twisted as if the ground beneath her had shifted. At the office, the air changed instantly. Conversations halted when she walked past. Colleagues who once nodded with respect now avoided her gaze. Others stared too long, their curiosity sharpened into judgment. By afternoon, the board had called an emergency meeting. The long conference table gleamed under harsh lights. Screens projected the incriminating photo larger than life. James sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, jaw clenched. Claire took her usual seat at the edge, her hands trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "This is not gossip," one director insisted. "This undermines credibility." The HR director cleared her throat, her smile brittle. "If there is a relationship, Mr. Whitmore, company policy requires disclosure. We must investigate." Claire's cheeks burned. The words cut deeper than the stares. She wanted to speak, to shout the truth, but her voice caught in her throat. All eyes pressed on her, waiting, judging. James's lawyers had already advised him, deny nothing, admit nothing, stay silent. His silence filled the room like smoke. To the board, it was strategy. To Claire, it was abandonment. Her chest ached as the meeting ended. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped. No one spoke to her as she gathered her notes, fingers clumsy, eyes fixed on the table. That evening, James found her at her desk. His expression was taut, his voice low. "I need to ask you something," he said. She looked up, weary, braced. "Do you have student loans?" The question struck like a blow. Her breath caught. "Of course I do. Most people my age do." His eyes did not soften. I needed the truth. Her throat tightened. Anger surged with humiliation. "The truth. You think I'm using you? You think I need rescuing?" Her voice shook, sharp with betrayal. I had to know. His words were calm, but the calm was worse than accusation. Claire felt something break inside. All the long nights, the endless effort, the careful strength she had worn like armor dismissed with one question. He did not see her resilience. He saw only suspicion. "You don't know me at all," she whispered. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall here, in his office, under his gaze. "And if you can't see who I am by now, nothing I say will matter." She turned, her heels striking the polished floor with each step. He called her name once, soft, almost regretful, but she did not stop. The elevator doors loomed ahead, metal shining, cold and final. She pressed the button with a hand that trembled despite her resolve. Behind her, James stood in the hallway, motionless, his face shadowed with frustration and something like regret. The doors slid open. Claire stepped inside, spine straight, chin lifted. The space was small, enclosing her, carrying her away from the place she had given so much of herself. As the doors closed, sealing her from his view, it felt less like a machine and more like a line being drawn, a line that divided what was from what would never be again. Her heart pounded in her chest as the elevator descended. Each floor ticked away like a chapter closing, like the echo of trust shattering in pieces too sharp to mend. James remained in the hallway, his hands clenched at his sides, knowing the silence he had chosen had cost him more than any scandal ever could. And somewhere in the city outside, storm clouds gathered, dark and heavy, waiting to break. Silence in Claire's small apartment at night was louder than any whisper in an office hallway. The refrigerator hummed, pipes rattled in the walls. But it was the emptiness that pressed hardest. The weight of a life paused, suspended between what had been and what had not yet begun. Each morning, she rose early, dressed in her neatest clothes, and boarded the train toward downtown Chicago. Interviews filled her calendar. Receptionists smiled politely as they guided her to glass-walled rooms. Managers shook hands and asked questions that circled delicately around her resume. Her answers were sharp, rehearsed, precise. She listed achievements, late nights, impossible schedules managed. But always, beneath the polite nods, she felt the shadow of the scandal trailing her. "Your qualifications are impressive," one man said, his voice smooth but eyes cautious. "But we value discretion above all." Another woman leaned forward, her tone kind but clipped. "We have a very professional culture here." You understand. Claire understood. She left each building with her shoulders squared, her expression tight, her heart bruised. Rejection emails followed within days, sometimes hours. Back in her apartment, bills piled on the counter. Student loan statements arrived in thick envelopes, reminders of promises she had once believed she could outrun. Meals grew simpler, canned soup, toast, eggs when she could afford them. Coffee came from the cheapest tin, brewed weak to make it last longer. To keep from unraveling, she clung to small rituals. She watered the single plant on her windowsill, speaking to it softly as if her voice might coax it to survive the winter. She sorted her mailbox, stacking envelopes into neat piles, though none held good news. She wrote budget lists in careful columns, erasing, rewriting, determined to impose order where chaos threatened. Yet at night, when the city outside glowed against her window, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. She remembered the rhythm of Whitmore Tower, the hum of elevators, the faint smell of polished marble. Her body still carried the memory of its relentless pace. And against her will, her mind carried the memory of James's voice. Across the city, in the tallest corner office of that same tower, James buried himself in work. Meetings stretched from dawn to dusk. Contracts demanded his signature. Investors sought his assurance. He gave it all with steady composure. To his board, he was unshaken. To the press, he was unflappable. But in the quiet of his office, when the city lights flickered across the glass, the absence gnawed at him. The chair across from his desk sat empty. The efficient presence that had once anticipated his needs was gone. He reached for coffee and found no second cup placed beside his. Files arrived through other assistants, organized but never with her precision. He told himself it was better this way. He had protected the company. He had drawn the line. Yet, late at night, when the building emptied and silence settled, he felt the cost more sharply than any financial loss. The world outside did not pause for either of them. Headlines carried updates about Whitmore Investments' new partnerships, bold strategies, billion-dollar ventures. Claire saw them in passing, printed across newspapers left behind on train seats, glowing on screens in coffee shops. She told herself she did not look, but her eyes always lingered. James, in turn, noticed when smaller articles appeared about staffing agencies, when lists of contractors included her name. He pretended not to read, but he read every word. They lived in parallel lines, apart but never entirely free of each other's orbit. Pride kept them silent. Fear kept them still. One gray morning, Claire sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through job postings with the grim determination of someone who could not afford despair. Most positions blurred together, too junior, too temporary, too far from the life she had fought to build. Then a subject line caught her eye. Event support. Needed short-term contract. The email came from a marketing agency she had worked with once, long ago. They needed extra hands for a major corporate unveiling. Logistics, guest management, behind-the-scenes coordination. The pay was modest, but enough to cover rent for a month. Her chest tightened as she read the details. It was not what she had dreamed of, not the kind of role she had once commanded with pride. But it was something. It was movement. It was survival. She clicked accept before she could talk herself out of it. What she did not see, not yet, was the final line of the project description, the client whose event she would help manage, the name that tied every detail together, Whitmore Investments. Fate does not knock politely. It pushes you straight into the very room you tried to avoid. Claire arrived at the downtown convention center early, her badge clipped neatly to her jacket, clipboard in hand. The agency's instructions had been precise: oversee seating charts, confirm catering schedules, double-check security passes. She threw herself into the tasks with mechanical focus. Rows of chairs gleamed under the stage lights. She bent to adjust them, aligning each one until the lines looked perfect. Her pen scratched across lists, checking names she did not recognize. She handed instructions to interns, her voice steady, though her hands trembled faintly. She had not known. She had not realized. The client for this unveiling, this billion-dollar announcement, was none other than Whitmore Investments. His name flashed across every banner. His initials adorned the sleek podium at the front of the hall. His presence filled the building even before he arrived. Claire's throat tightened. She told herself she could manage. She was staff now, temporary, invisible. She would keep her head down, do her work, and leave as if it were any other event. But her body betrayed her. Each time she glimpsed his name on the massive screens. Her pulse quickened. Each time she passed the podium, her mind replayed the last words they had exchanged, sharp as glass. Backstage, she checked sound systems, nodded to technicians, adjusted water bottles on a tray. Every detail mattered. Every detail was something she could control, unlike the storm of her own heart. Then the murmur of the crowd shifted. A low ripple moved across the hall, a wave of recognition. Photographers adjusted their lenses. Reporters straightened. Conversations hushed. He had arrived. James Whitmore walked through the side entrance, security flanking him, his suit dark and tailored, his expression composed. He moved with the same unshakable confidence that made boardrooms fall silent. Yet something in his eyes carried weight, as if the months had left their mark. Claire froze in the shadow of the wings. She told herself to look away, to step back into the comfort of anonymity. But when his gaze swept the stage, it found her, just for a second. His eyes locked on hers across the distance, past cameras, past staff, past the chaos of an event built for spectacle. The world narrowed to that single moment of recognition. No words, no gestures, only the sharp, undeniable spark of two people seeing what they had lost and what had never left. Claire's breath caught. She gripped her clipboard tighter, knuckles white. Her instinct screamed to retreat, to vanish into the bustle of backstage workers, to hide before the wound inside her could be seen. But she stayed still, rooted. James did not falter. His stride slowed only fractionally, but the look in his eyes changed. It softened, sharpened, carried something he had kept buried too long. The announcer's voice echoed across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the CEO of Whitmore Investments, James Whitmore." Applause swelled, cameras flashed, the world demanded his attention. Yet, even as he climbed the steps to the stage, he glanced back once more, to the corner where she stood in the wings. In that instant, a decision settled in his chest. He had been silent before, restrained, careful. That silence had cost him her trust, her presence, her heart. This time, he would not remain silent. He reached the podium, notes waiting neatly in front of him, teleprompters glowing with the speech prepared for shareholders and press. His hands rested on the edges of the stand, but instead of reading, he paused. The crowd hushed, sensing the shift, and from the shadows, Claire watched, her pulse hammering, knowing without knowing that something was about to break. Courage did not always come in the form of sealed contracts or numbers on a ledger. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in the simple act of opening one's heart in front of strangers. James Whitmore stood at the podium, teleprompter glowing with the carefully prepared speech. Numbers, projections, partnerships all laid out in precise order. He had rehearsed it countless times, every word polished, every gesture calculated. Yet now, as he glanced across the auditorium, he felt the weight of everything that had passed the whispers, the misunderstandings, the months of distance. And there she was, Claire Bennett, in the wings, clipboard clutched, posture tense, eyes wide with cautious anticipation. He could see the subtle tremble in her fingers, the quick inhale she could not hide. She looked poised, yet fragile, each breath a quiet admission that the months of silence had left their mark. He let the teleprompter fade from his mind. The script no longer mattered. What mattered was honesty, raw and unfiltered. He straightened, taking a deep breath that carried the quiet determination of someone finally ready to speak without armor. His eyes swept across the crowd, then settled on hers. And he began. I am supposed to speak to you today about numbers, projections, the future of our company, he said, voice measured, but there was a tremor beneath the surface, almost imperceptible. But today, I need to speak about something else. Someone else. Claire's chest tightened. The hum of anticipation rippled through the hall. Cameras shifted, flashes stuttering in recognition. Every head turned, some curious, some incredulous. He paused, letting the moment settle, letting the silence emphasize the truth he was about to reveal. This woman, he continued, his gaze unwavering, Claire Bennett, my assistant, has changed the way I see the world. She challenges me, pushes me, reminds me to be better, not just as a CEO, but as a person. A murmur moved through the audience. Claire's fingers slipped slightly on her clipboard. Her heartbeat quickened, every thump echoing in her ears. She could hardly process the words, yet every syllable struck her like a balm for months of doubt. He leaned forward, voice softening but firm. Her dedication, her strength, her courage under pressure. It has reminded me what it is to care, to trust, and to believe. She has been the mirror I needed, the anchor I didn't realize I was missing. Claire's breath caught. The clipboard trembled in her hands. Her eyes glistened. She told herself to stay composed, to maintain professionalism, but she could not stop the warmth rising in her chest, the tears threatening to spill. Close your eyes and trust me, James said, the words low, intimate, carrying across the vast hall with clarity and weight. The room seemed to pause. Camera flashes stuttered and froze the image in time. Reporters whispered, their pens still. Board members exchanged astonished glances. Every eye was on him, yet somehow, Claire felt as though no one existed but them. Her fingers let go of the clipboard. It slipped softly to the floor with a muted thud, the sound echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Shame, fear, relief, and a surge of emotion mingled inside her. She felt exposed, yet seen in a way that transcended any professional acknowledgement. James continued, unfazed by the chaos. He did not retreat into measured corporate language. He did not deflect, hide, or apologize. He embraced the risk, his reputation, his meticulously curated image. It all mattered less than the truth. He spoke of the small moments that had gone unnoticed by everyone else, the long nights when she stayed late, the meticulous care with schedules and details, the quiet resilience under impossible pressure. He acknowledged her humanity, her strength, her very presence as something extraordinary. And with each word, the narrative shifted, the scandal, the whispers, the speculation all dissolved in the light of honesty. What had been perceived as favoritism now became recognition. What had been hidden became celebrated. Claire could not move. Her eyes followed him, absorbing the cadence of his confession. Tears spilled freely, sliding down her cheeks unnoticed by the crowd, unnoticed by herself. Every restraint she had held for months shattered, leaving only a raw, unfiltered pulse of emotion. He stepped back slightly, letting the weight of his words resonate. The applause began cautiously, then grew, some tentative, some heartfelt. Camera shutters clicked incessantly. Flashbulbs illuminated the faces of those witnessing not a corporate declaration, but a human one. Her legs felt weak. She bent slightly, collecting herself. The tears blurred her vision, but clarity emerged through the haze. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer under scrutiny. She was recognized, valued, and honored for who she was, not who the world thought she might be. James remained at the podium, eyes locked on hers. No one else mattered. The rest of the room could swirl with speculation, admiration, or gossip, but here, now, it was just them, and the truth he had finally spoken aloud. For the first time in months, Claire allowed herself to breathe freely. The cage of fear, of isolation, of misjudgment dissolved in that single brave confession. She straightened, standing tall, letting the tears flow without shame, feeling a surge of life, of possibility, of rebirth. Outside the immediate glow of the stage lights, the city carried on, indifferent to the drama inside. But inside, hearts had shifted, walls had fallen, bridges had been rebuilt in the span of a single, courageous declaration. The air between them, previously taut with tension, now shimmered with possibility. Claire felt it. James felt it. They had both been wounded, both cautious, both proud. But the honesty spoken here, in front of countless strangers, had cleared a path forward. And as the applause swelled, echoing against high ceilings, Claire realized something vital. The moment had passed from private to public, from tentative to irrevocable, and it carried with it a promise, a fragile, luminous promise that they could step into something new, together. Apologies carry weight only when one dares to reveal the imperfect parts of themselves. The convention center was quiet now, the buzz of cameras and applause long faded. Chairs were stacked, banners folded, cables coiled neatly on the floor. The echoes of the day lingered faintly in the high ceilings, shadows stretching long under dim lights. James Whitmore moved through the empty hallways, purposeful yet hesitant. He had spoken publicly, boldly, confessed openly, and yet, attention remained an invisible line he still needed to cross. He needed to find her. Claire Bennett stood near the back corridor, clipboard now empty, hands resting loosely at her sides. Her eyes lingered on the polished floor, the reflections of scattered lights dancing faintly. She felt the residual tremor of adrenaline, of vulnerability exposed before a crowd. Her chest tightened as she replayed every word he had spoken. He approached, slow, careful, his shadow stretching toward her across the tiles. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, not carrying across an auditorium, but intimate, direct. "I need to tell you something," he began. Pause. His hands found each other, fingers intertwining. "I was afraid of being judged, of being seen as less than perfect, afraid you might see the parts of me I've kept hidden for years." Claire lifted her eyes, startled. She hadn't expected this, the confession, the vulnerability. She had seen his composure in boardrooms, his calm authority in meetings, but never this openness. Her shoulders loosened slightly. Her chest, so long braced, felt a crack of relief. "I didn't realize how much silence could hurt," he continued, "how much distance could grow between us, just because I held back." She listened, heartbeat settling into a slower rhythm. The months of tension, of unspoken words, of careful walls, seemed to gather into this moment. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that strength did not mean carrying everything alone. Claire lowered her gaze for a moment, remembering all the nights she had walked home through the streets of Chicago, feeling invisible, judged, exhausted. Her walls had kept her safe, but they had also isolated her. Now, hearing him speak, she felt the first true invitation to lean on someone else. Her lips parted, words unspoken hovering in the air. She realized she didn't need to respond immediately. The gesture that followed spoke louder than any words. She stepped slightly closer. Their space narrowed naturally, quietly, without force or declaration. James extended his arms slowly, a simple invitation. Claire hesitated, then allowed herself to be enveloped. The embrace was gentle but firm, a wordless acknowledgement of months of misunderstanding, strain, and longing. Her head rested lightly against his chest, listening to the familiar steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was a sound she had known from afar, but never up close, never in a way that offered solace instead of pressure. She felt the tension of her shoulders ease, felt the knots in her chest unravel. He held her, his hands resting lightly on her back, grounding, anchoring, steady. For a long moment, they remained silent. The room around them faded, the months of rumor, suspicion, and isolation dissipated in the simple reality of shared presence. Claire finally spoke, voice soft, almost a whisper. "I forgot what it meant to be able to trust someone, to let someone in." James nodded, his chin brushing her hair slightly. "And I forgot that protecting everything sometimes costs what matters most." They stood in quiet reflection, hands still holding, eyes meeting in mutual understanding. Both had carried burdens silently. Both had fortified walls around their hearts. And now, for the first time, they allowed themselves to recognize the relief in letting go. Even if just a little. She stepped back slightly, searching his eyes for the sincerity she felt. He met her gaze, unwavering. In that connection, she saw acceptance, acknowledgement, and the gentle permission to be vulnerable without fear. "Strength isn't carrying everything alone," he said softly. "Sometimes, it's knowing when to let someone else share the load." Her lips curved into a faint, honest smile. "And sometimes, it's letting yourself be held." She replied. They lingered, the warmth of shared acknowledgement filling the spaces previously occupied by fear. The past months of tension, of pride and independence had brought them here, but it was this moment that offered healing. Outside, the night air of Chicago was crisp, cold enough to remind them of the world beyond the hall. They stepped into it together, coats wrapped tight, breath visible in the chill, but inside, warmth radiated from their shared understanding, from the bridge they had rebuilt silently between their hearts. It was not perfection, it was not a sudden resolution, but it was real, solid, tangible, and it offered a foundation upon which trust could grow, slowly, deliberately, unhurried. As they walked down the city streets, the glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, Claire felt something she hadn't in months, the confidence that she could be herself, that she could accept care without guilt, that she could let someone witness her humanity without fear of judgment. James, for his part, felt the weight of previous silence lift slightly, replaced by the knowledge that honesty, even at great personal risk, could restore what he had almost lost. They moved in tandem, side by side, neither rushing, neither retreating. The city continued around them, indifferent and alive, but for Claire and James, the moment held significance beyond the noise, a quiet victory over fear, a reclaiming of trust, a simple acceptance that vulnerability could become strength. And as the night deepened, their steps carrying them forward, both realized the cold of Chicago could no longer touch the warmth they had found together. Within the simplest truth of standing side by side, love did not erase scars. It taught one how to carry them together. Months had passed since the auditorium, since the public confession that had shifted the course of their lives. Whitmore Investments thrummed with activity as usual, but within its glass walls, the rhythm was subtly different. Claire Bennett returned to the company, not as an assistant, not as a temporary hand, but as a newly appointed manager. Her office overlooked the city, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, glinting off her meticulously organized desk. Every detail reflected her capability, her persistence, and now her renewed confidence. The first morning back, she arrived early. The hum of elevators greeted her. Security nodded politely, recognizing her now as a leader, not merely support. She took a deep breath, letting herself savor the moment, the journey that had begun with fear, exhaustion, and whispers had carried her to this point. She felt grounded, capable, and seen. James Whitmore, too, had shifted. Months of reflection had tempered his relentless pace. He still worked long hours, still commanded rooms, but he had learned to pause, to listen, to attend to moments that did not fit neatly into spreadsheets or projections. He greeted Claire with a nod across the hall, subtle yet meaningful. There was a shared understanding now, a quiet acknowledgement of trust rebuilt. Evening came. The city lights reflected across Lake Michigan, twinkling like distant stars. They walked side by side along the shore, coats wrapped tight, breath visible in the crisp air. Waves lapped gently against the promenade, the sound rhythmic and grounding. They spoke sparingly, letting silence carry weight. Words were not always needed. A shared glance, a subtle smile, the brushing of hands, all conveyed the depth of their connection. Claire finally broke the quiet, her voice soft but steady. She spoke of balance, of the long nights, the relentless pace, the lessons learned. She admitted the joy of being able to trust, to allow herself rest without guilt, to accept help without shame. James listened, attentive, nodding gently. He shared his own reflections, admitting how his fear of imperfection had kept him silent, how pride had sometimes obstructed what mattered most. He acknowledged the relief, the joy, of being able to face challenges together rather than alone. They walked further, passing benches and lanterns casting soft pools of light on the path. Claire paused, eyes tracing the horizon, where the water met the sky. She imagined the months ahead, not perfect, not free from difficulty, but shared, deliberate, tempered with patience. James reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Instead, she let her fingers curl around his. The touch was gentle, grounding, a promise in silence. No grand declarations were necessary. Their steps fell in tandem, a quiet rhythm, an unspoken agreement to move forward together. They discussed projects, yes, but also small pleasures, favorite cafes, upcoming art exhibits, weekend walks. Life, once dominated by deadlines and speculation, now held space for ordinary moments, moments of simple humanity. Claire realized she could breathe fully again. She allowed herself to lean on him in subtle ways, trusting his presence, his attention, and James, in turn, let himself notice the details that had always mattered: her focus, her humor, her quiet strength. He offered pauses, gestures of care, unhurried moments that honored both their pasts and their shared present. The city buzzed around them, cars, distant voices, the gentle lapping of waves, yet they existed in a pocket of calm. The wind carried the scent of the lake, crisp and clean, filling their lungs with freshness, a renewal. They spoke of the future, not in promises of perfection, but in commitment to presence, to showing up, to building a life that acknowledged their scars, respected their journeys, and welcomed growth. No grand declarations, no sweeping guarantees, just the steady cadence of two people choosing to walk together. Even as night deepened, the warmth of connection persisted. Streetlights shimmered off wet pavement, reflections of stars in the river of the city. They paused, looking at each other. In the quiet, Claire whispered inwardly that she was no longer running from fear, from isolation, from doubt. James's gaze met hers. She saw the same resolve, the same acknowledgement mirrored in his eyes. The months of misunderstanding, pride, and cautious distance had yielded this clarity partnership, trust, and steady presence. A final breeze swept across the promenade. Claire tightened her coat, smiling faintly, content. James's hand remained on hers, a silent anchor. No words were necessary. The night, the city, the water, the quiet understanding, they all conspired to affirm the victory of calm after the storm. As they turned back toward the lights of the city, their steps light yet deliberate, the knowledge lingered they would move forward together, not erasing the past, but carrying it, learning from it, and allowing it to strengthen the bond between them. And somewhere deep within, a quiet certainty arose. I'm not running anymore, thought Claire, and mirrored silently by James. Neither am I. The lake reflected the city lights, the sky deepened into indigo, and the world felt both vast and intimate. They walked on, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, together. The journey of Claire and James reminds us that strength is not measured solely by endurance, independence, or the ability to carry burdens alone. True resilience lies in knowing when to pause, when to accept help, and when to trust another with your vulnerability. Life often places us in situations where pride, fear, or misunderstanding may build walls between us and those who care. Yet, it is precisely through openness and courage that meaningful connections are forged. Their story also highlights the power of empathy and attentiveness. Small gestures, quiet acts of support, and genuine acknowledgement can bridge gaps that words alone cannot. Likewise, the courage to speak honestly, even when it risks reputation or pride, can transform misunderstanding into trust and isolation into partnership. For anyone navigating professional pressures, family obligations, or personal challenges, this narrative offers a reminder, allowing yourself to be seen imperfect, exhausted, or uncertain is not weakness. It is the first step toward healing, growth, and authentic relationships. By embracing vulnerability alongside perseverance, we create a life rich not only in achievements, but in human connection, understanding, and enduring love. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey. Your time and attention mean the world. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more heartfelt tales. Every click, every share helps us bring inspiring stories to life for you and others.